She built a firm from nothing. She closed deals that other lawyers would not touch. She spent 30 years becoming the most trusted name on Wall Street. And then she had one dinner too many with the wrong person. In a single morning, before most of the city had finished its coffee, everything she had built, the firm, the clients, the reputation that had taken 3 decades to construct, was gone. Not because she made a mistake, not because she failed, but because she trusted someone she had never thought to question. This is the story of Victoria Hale, the woman who could read any room on earth, except the one she chose to call safe. She had come from nothing, which is to say, she had come from everything that matters: hunger, discipline, and the particular clarity that poverty gives to ambition. And she grew up in a city where the factories were closing, and the fathers were quieter every year, and the mothers worked double shifts and called it fine. Victoria watched all of it. She absorbed all of it. And at 17, she made herself a promise so private and so absolute that she never spoke it aloud, not once in her entire life. She would build something that could not be taken from her. By her mid-30s, she had done it. Her firm, Hale and Associates, occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. She advised the kind of clients who did not advertise their wealth: sovereign funds, private dynasties, corporations so large their names had become verbs. She had negotiated deals in 4 languages, structured acquisitions on 4 continents, and had never, in 19 years of practice, had lost a deal she had personally led. The press called her the architect. Her competitors called her, in private, something less flattering, but equally accurate. Her clients called her, simply, indispensable. She wore the same style of charcoal suit every day, as if the decision of what to wear was a luxury she could not afford to spend thought on. She arrived at the office before anyone else and left after everyone had gone. She did not attend the galas or the charity dinners or the industry conferences where people networked and congratulated each other and called it work. She had no interest in being seen. She had interest only in building. And build she did. Year after year, floor by floor, until the structure she had raised from nothing was so tall and so solid that she had stopped, at some point, looking up at it with wonder, and she had simply come to believe it was permanent. That was the first crack, though she did not know it yet. For a woman who trusted no one professionally, Victoria Hale had one exception, one person in her life who sat outside the careful architecture of her suspicion. One person for whom the door, always locked, stood quietly open. Her name was Margaret Cole. They had met 16 years ago at an industry dinner neither of them had wanted to attend. They had found each other at the edge of the room, 2 women doing the same quiet calculation about how soon they could leave, and had laughed about it in the way people laugh when they recognize themselves in a stranger. From that evening, a friendship had grown, slow and careful and real, the way rare things grow. Margaret was a senior partner at a rival firm, which made her, in theory, someone Victoria should have kept at arm's length. But Margaret was also warm in ways Victoria was not. She laughed easily. She remembered the names of people's children. She sent handwritten notes after difficult periods, not because it was strategic, but because it occurred to her to do it. She was, in a world built entirely on performance and calculation, genuinely kind. And she had sat on the board of 4 major corporations over 16 years. The same board circles Victoria moved in. The same tables, the same rooms. Every Friday evening, they had dinner. the same quiet restaurant on the Upper East Side, the same corner table, the same bottle of Burgundy. They did not talk about work, by unspoken agreement, not the specific work, not the specific clients, but sometimes when a deal was very large or a problem was very difficult, yet Victoria would think out loud, not for advice. She never needed advice, but for the particular clarity that comes from speaking a thing into the air in the presence of someone who understands your world. Margaret always listened. Margaret never repeated what she heard. Margaret was, Victoria had decided long ago, the one relationship in her life she did not need to protect herself inside. She had never asked whether Margaret had made the same decision about her. The Vantage acquisition arrived in October, the way the most consequential things arrive, quietly, as a phone call, on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday. Vantage Capital was acquiring Northfield Energy in what would be, at $16 billion, the largest private energy acquisition in a decade. Victoria was retained as lead counsel by Vantage's managing partners, men who had worked with her before, who paid her rates without negotiation, who understood that what they were buying was not hours, but outcomes. The deal was complicated in the specific way that large deals are always complicated, not by any single obstacle, but by the accumulated friction of many competing interests. Northfield's board was divided. 3 of its 7 members were quietly allied with a competing bidder, a European infrastructure fund that had made a lower offer and was now engineering delays to run out the clock on Vantage's financing window. Victoria spent 3 months mapping every pressure point. She identified which board members were movable and what would move them. Then she built a strategy of deliberate isolation, neutralizing the opposition one vote at a time, using regulatory filings, governance procedures, and carefully timed disclosures to shrink the space in which the dissenting members could operate. It was, by any measure, brilliant work, legal, precise, and absolutely ruthless in the way that only legal things can be ruthless. She told Margaret about it on a Friday evening in November. Not all of it, but enough. The structure of the approach, the specific vulnerabilities she had identified, the sequencing that would make it work. She spoke in the abstract, as she always did, and Margaret listened in the attentive way she always did, asking occasional quiet questions that helped Victoria think more clearly. So what Victoria did not know was that Margaret Cole had been on the advisory committee of the European Infrastructure Fund for 2 years, a fact that was not secret. It was disclosed in Margaret's firm's annual report, in a footnote on page 47. A footnote Victoria had never read because she had never thought to look. The story ran on a Wednesday morning in February at 6:17 in the digital edition of the Financial Review. By 6:45, it had been picked up by 3 wire services. By 7:30, it was on every terminal on the street. The headline accused Victoria Hale, lead counsel on the Vantage deal, of leaking strategy. It claimed she had compromised the entire Northfield process. The article was detailed, specific. It described, in language that was unmistakably familiar to Victoria, the precise structure of her approach to the Northfield board. It named the board members she had targeted. It described the sequencing of her regulatory filings before those filings had become public record. It knew things that were not in any document, things that existed only in conversation. Victoria read the article twice, standing in her kitchen in the gray morning light, still in the clothes she had slept in, a cup of tea growing cold in her hand. She did not panic. She had trained herself, over decades, to treat catastrophe the way a surgeon treats a hemorrhage, with absolute focus, zero emotion, and a clarity that excluded everything except the problem in front of her. She set down the tea. She picked up her phone. She began to make calls, And in the space between one call and the next, it's in 2 seconds of silence that she would remember for the rest of her life. She understood, not suspected, understood, with the same precision she brought to every other analysis she had ever performed. She understood where the information had gone, and how, and why. She finished making her calls. She showered and dressed. She went to the office. She did not call Margaret. What followed was not dramatic in the way the newspapers made it seem. From the inside, it was simply a series of doors closing. First, Vantage Capital requested a meeting, and then, at that meeting, terminated her engagement. Their managing partners were apologetic, in the specific way that powerful men are apologetic when they are protecting themselves, full of warmth and completely without substance. They spoke of the deal, of the optics, makes of the importance of appearances. She understood exactly what they meant. She understood. The Northfield acquisition collapsed without her strategic hand guiding it. The European fund, Margaret's fund, moved into the vacuum, and the deal they had been engineering delays for was signed 6 weeks later at a price 12% below what Vantage had offered. The regulatory inquiry was open by April. Not criminal, there was nothing criminal, because Victoria had done nothing wrong. But the kind of professional review that takes 18 months and produces a finding that, however favorable, arrives too late to matter. Clients began to call, not to offer support, but to ask careful questions about ongoing engagements. The questions were professional and reasonable and devastating. She answered each one with full transparency, which was the only way she knew how to answer anything. Most of them thanked her and went quiet, and within weeks, retained new counsel. Her partners called an emergency meeting. Victoria sat at the head of the table she had built from nothing and presented her defense with the same composure she brought to every courtroom, every negotiation, every impossible situation she had ever walked into and walked out of. It did not matter. The firm she had built, floor by floor, year by year, out of nothing, and hunger and 19 years of absolute precision, dissolved. Not in scandal, not in failure. In the quiet, terrible way that things dissolve on Wall Street, which is simply, people stopped believing in it, and without belief, even the most solid structure becomes air. By the end of the year, the glass tower was someone else's address. Yet Victoria never confronted Margaret. This surprised people in the years afterward, when the story became something people discussed. It surprised them because they expected her to be angry, and expected anger to require action. But Victoria Hale had always understood something that most people do not. That confrontation is for people who still need something from the other person. She needed nothing from Margaret. There was nothing Margaret could give her. No admission would restore what had been taken. No denial would change what Victoria knew. She removed Margaret from her life, the way she removed everything she had finished with, completely, without ceremony, without announcement. On the last Friday they would ever share, Victoria sat alone at the corner table of the restaurant they had occupied for 16 years. She ordered the burgundy. She drank 1 glass. She paid the bill, tipped generously, and said goodbye to the waiter by name, because she had always known his name, and then she walked out into the cold night air and did not look back. That was the last time she cried, though she would not have called it that. The inquiry closed in the spring of the following year. Victoria Hale was fully exonerated. No misconduct, no violation. A finding that confirmed what she had always known, that she had done everything correctly, and it had not mattered. The exoneration was printed in 4 paragraphs on page 12 of the Financial Review. No follow-up story, no correction of the record, The original accusation had been front page. The truth was buried where truth usually ends up when it arrives after the damage is done. She was 56 years old. She had no firm. She had no active clients. She had a reputation that had been precisely and deliberately dismantled by someone who had understood it better than anyone, because she had built it, in part, by talking about it, on Friday evenings, in a quiet corner restaurant, over good wine and absolute trust. She bought a smaller apartment on the west side. She read. She walked for hours every day through the city she had spent 30 years in without ever really seeing. She slept, for the first time since her 20s, without waking at 4 in the morning with a mind already working. And she thought. Not about what had happened. She had finished with that quickly, because she was not a person who lived inside her own wounds. She thought about what she had built and what had held and what had not. As about the difference between the structure she had raised in stone and steel and the structure she had trusted in a person. About the one she had tested endlessly and the one she had never tested at all. She thought about what it means to build something and never inspect the foundation. 2 years after the towers fell, Victoria Hale accepted a position as a senior fellow at a corporate governance institute, the kind of role that would have seemed like a consolation prize to the woman she had been, but which felt, to the woman she was becoming, like something more honest. She wrote. Not memoirs. She had no interest in memoirs. But papers on governance, on accountability, on the structural vulnerabilities of large institutions to the specific kind of betrayal that comes from within, all from the close relationships that every institution depends upon and almost no institution knows how to protect against. She spoke at conferences, occasionally, and was surprised to find that rooms still went quiet when she entered them, not because of fear, now. For a different reason she could not quite name, but which she began, slowly, to accept as its own form of authority. She took on 2 pro bono cases. Women who had been pushed out of firms through the particular mechanisms she understood better than anyone. She did not win both of them. She won one. The other settled in a way that was not justice, but was something. She found, unexpectedly, that she cared about the outcome in a way she had not cared about outcomes in a long time, not because it was her reputation, but because it was someone else's life. This was new. This was, as she thought on a quiet evening in her smaller apartment, looking out at a city she was finally beginning to actually inhabit. This was what she had not left room for. Victoria Hale did not fall because she was outmaneuvered. She was not outmaneuvered. She was outtrusted. And that is an entirely different kind of defeat. She had spent 30 years building walls around her professional life, so precise and so high that nothing and no one could breach them. She had stress-tested every partnership, every contract, every alliance. She had treated the entire world as a system of incentives to be understood and anticipated and managed. And then she had built one door in the wall, one opening, one space where the rules did not apply, where analysis was suspended, where she allowed herself the single luxury she could not afford, the belief that someone was exactly who they appeared to be. The tragedy is not that she trusted. The tragedy is what she trusted in. She trusted in duration, in the simple fact of 16 years, as though time were the same thing as character. She trusted in warmth, in kindness, in remembered birthdays and handwritten notes, as though generosity in small things were evidence of integrity in large ones. She trusted in recognition, in the relief of feeling understood, as though being known were the same as being safe. None of these are trust. They are the feeling of trust. And the feeling of trust, mistaken for the thing itself, is the oldest and most expensive error a person can make. Margaret Cole was not a monster. This is important to say. She was a person with her own interests, her own loyalties, her own calculus of what she could afford to sacrifice and what she could not. She made a choice that cost someone else everything and cost her almost nothing, which is the anatomy of most betrayals. They are not committed by villains. They are committed by ordinary people when the price is right and the risk is low, and there is a door left open that no one thought to guard. Victoria Hale built the greatest professional structure of her generation. She just forgot to look at who held the key. The throne she built was glass all along. Not because she was weak, but because she was human. And because being human means, eventually, letting someone in. The question is never whether to let someone in. The question is whether you have looked, really looked, at who is standing at the door. She knows the answer to that now. She learned it the only way any of us ever really learn anything, at a cost she did not choose and could not afford. And still, despite everything, she would tell you it was worth it. Not the fall, but what she found at the bottom of it, a quieter life, a more honest one, built not of glass and ambition, but of something smaller and, at last, entirely her own.